Julian Hawthorne, Goldman, sat in a big office on the 40th floor of a tall building in Manhattan. His office looked fancy with big glass windows and wooden walls. Julian Hawthorne was staring out at the city, deep in thought. He was holding a piece of paper, a will from his dad, Edward Carrington, who had passed away 3 months ago. The will said that Julian Hawthorne had to get married in 6 months to inherit his father's $2.3 billion fortune. It made him angry. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, running his fingers through his brown hair. His father always knew how to control things, even from beyond the grave. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. "Come in," he said, not turning around. His assistant, Sophia Rivers Chun, entered with a cup of coffee. Sophia Rivers, 28 years old, was smart, quiet, and always did her work well. She placed the coffee on his desk and said, "Mr. Goldman, Mr. Harrison from the Asian division is waiting for your call." Julian Hawthorne's eyes stayed on the city outside. "Cancel the call with Harrison," he said. "We need to talk." Sophia Rivers stood quietly for a moment, holding her notebook. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Sit down," Julian Hawthorne said, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. When she sat down, he slid the will toward her. "Read the underlined part." Sophia Rivers quickly read the will and looked up, understanding what it meant. "You need to get married in 6 months?" she asked, surprised. Julian Hawthorne nodded. "I have an idea," he said. "I'll pay you $5 million if you marry me for 1 year. Then we'll divorce and you can move on with your life. I'll keep control of the company." Sophia Rivers stared at him, shocked. "You want me to help you lie?" she asked. I'm asking for your help," Julian Hawthorne replied. "You know the company, you know my routine, and you're discreet. It'll benefit both of us." Sophia Rivers looked at him, her fingers tight on the paper. "That's a low offer, even by Wall Street standards." "It's practical," Julian Hawthorne said calmly. "You could help your family with $5 million. Your mother works 2 jobs to pay your father's medical bills, doesn't she?" The words hit Sophia Rivers hard. She stood up, angry. "That's low," she said. Julian Hawthorne stayed calm. "Help me keep my family's legacy and I'll help yours." Sophia Rivers walked over to the window, her back to him, thinking carefully. "We'd have to live together," she said finally. "My penthouse has 5 bedrooms," Julian Hawthorne replied. "You'll have your own space." "What about work?" Sophia Rivers asked. "You'd still be my assistant. Nothing would change at work," Julian Hawthorne said. Sophia Rivers turned to face him, her eyes full of uncertainty. "Except it would be a lie." "It's a lie that could change both our lives," Julian Hawthorne said. She stayed silent for a while, looking at the city. "I need time to think," Sophia Rivers said at last. "You have 24 hours, Julian Hawthorne said, turning back to his laptop. The next day, Sophia Rivers couldn't stop thinking about Julian Hawthorne's offer. She was in her small apartment in Queens, the same city that Julian Hawthorne saw from his tall office building. He lived in a world of luxury, and she lived in a world where her mother worked hard every day just to pay bills. Then, Sophia Rivers got a message from the hospital. Her father's medical bills had arrived, and the amount was too much. Even with her mom's 2 jobs, it seemed impossible to pay for the treatment her father needed. Her mom, Clara Monroe, came home tired from her work at the local restaurant. She was 55 years old with wrinkles from years of hard work. "You look worried," Clara Monroe said. "What's wrong?" Sophia Rivers tried to smile. "I'm just working, Mom. It's fine." Clara Monroe sat down on the bed. "I know that look. Your dad had it when he had to make tough choices." Sophia Rivers felt her throat tighten. Her father had been a university professor, but now he was sick and needed help. "Mom," Sophia Rivers said, "what if there was a way to help Dad? What if there was money for the treatment?" Clara Monroe frowned. "What are you planning?" Sophia Rivers quickly said, "Nothing illegal. Just complicated." Before Clara Monroe could ask more, the doorbell rang. Sophia Rivers opened the door to find a delivery. Inside was an elegant envelope with a key and a note that said, To make your decision easier, Penthouse 4501, Park Avenue, EG. The key felt heavy in Sophia Rivers's hand. It was for Julian Hawthorne's penthouse, the fancy apartment he had shown her. Sophia Rivers decided to go and see it for herself. When she arrived at the building, the doorman greeted her like she already lived there. A private elevator took her straight to the penthouse. When the doors opened, she gasped. The apartment was huge, with big windows and a view of the whole city. Everything inside was beautiful and expensive. Then Julian Hawthorne appeared at the door, dressed casually. "How did you know I'd come?" Sophia Rivers asked, surprised. "Because you're practical," Julian Hawthorne said. "And because I saw the look on your face when I mentioned your family." Sophia Rivers felt her anger rise. "You have no right to use my family like that." "I'm not using you," Julian Hawthorne said, pouring himself a drink. "I'm offering a solution." Sophia Rivers looked out at the city. "And now you want me to help you lie?" "I want you to help me keep control of the company my father built," Julian Hawthorne said, "and in return, I'll help your family." Sophia Rivers stayed silent, thinking about her father in the hospital and her mother working too hard. Finally, she spoke. "If I agree, we'll need rules." Julian Hawthorne smiled. "Of course. First, we'll keep our relationship professional at work. No public displays of affection." "Reasonable," Sophia Rivers said. "Second, when this is over, you'll give me a good letter of recommendation," Julian Hawthorne said. "Agreed," she replied. "Third," she said, turning to face him, "no trying to control my personal life." Julian Hawthorne nodded. "Deal." They shook hands, and for the first time, Sophia Rivers felt something different. Julian Hawthorne was serious. "Welcome to the Goldman family, future Mrs. Goldman," he said. When Sophia Rivers left the penthouse that night, she wasn't just carrying a key. She was carrying the weight of a big decision. She didn't know it yet, but this decision would change everything. What she didn't realize was that her choice would lead to more than just a business agreement. It would create something much more complicated than she ever expected. Soon, news of their engagement spread through New York social circles, causing a lot of gossip. Sophia Rivers tried on a fancy dress for their engagement party. It was beautiful, but she felt like she didn't belong in that world. Catherine, the event planner, complimented her, but Sophia Rivers could tell she was surprised by how different Sophia Rivers was from the usual high society people. Julian Hawthorne walked in, looking sharp in his suit. They shared a moment of silence as their eyes met through the mirror. Something felt different, but neither of them knew yet what was about to happen. Julian Hawthorne asked the stylist and the planner if everything was ready for the big event tomorrow. He smiled and told them that the invitations had been sent, the press had been told in secret, and everything was going according to plan. But there was one thing still on his mind. "Your mom doesn't like me," he said. Sophia Rivers adjusted her dress. "Isabella Carrington doesn't like anyone who doesn't come from a family with lots of money," she replied. "But she'll get used to me, she always does." Julian Hawthorne smiled. "And what about the council? They're watching too." "They're okay because I'm following the rules in the will?" Julian Hawthorne said, moving closer and adjusting the strap on Sophia Rivers's dress. His fingers brushed against her shoulder, making her feel a little surprised. "You look beautiful," he added, and it made her feel odd. "Is that part of the deal?" "No," he said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. That was just the truth. Before Sophia Rivers could think about what he said, Catherine, who worked with them, came back with a list of things to do for the party. The moment between Sophia Rivers and Julian Hawthorne was gone. The next few hours were busy with party planning. Sophia Rivers barely had time to visit her parents at the hospital. Because she had to tell them that she was engaged to her boss, but she didn't tell them the whole story. She said that their relationship had grown naturally and that she would be well taken care of. Her mom didn't like the idea. "I don't know if I like this," she said in Chinese, looking at Sophia Rivers's big engagement ring. Marriage shouldn't be about money. Um, Sophia Rivers lied. It's not about money, Mom. It's about opportunities. Her dad, even though he was sick, gave her a worried look. Sophia Rivers held his hand and promised it's going to be okay, knowing that the money would help get him the best treatment. Back at Julian Hawthorne's big apartment, Sophia Rivers found him working in his office. He looked serious. "We need to talk about our story," he said, pointing to a chair in front of him. "People will want to know how we fell in love, when we had our first kiss, and when we realized it was more than just attraction." Sophia Rivers looked at him. "Do you really think people will believe that you, Julian Hawthorne Goldman, fell in love with your assistant?" "Why not?" Julian Hawthorne asked. "You're smart, dedicated, and beautiful. It wouldn't be the first time a boss falls in love with someone who works for him." "But it's not real," Sophia Rivers said. Julian Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. "Our first kiss," he said, his voice now more businesslike, "was after a tough meeting with some Japanese investors. You stayed late to help me organize the papers. We were both tired and relieved that the meeting went well, and then you kissed me in the elevator." Sophia Rivers nodded. "It was late. We were tired. We were both feeling the tension from the past few months." Julian Hawthorne smiled at her. "You're good at this." "I'm good at understanding stories," Sophia Rivers corrected. "It's part of my job to know what people want to hear." Julian Hawthorne looked at her closely. "What do you think people want to hear about us?" "They want to believe that you're not just a cold businessman. They want to think that even you have a heart, and they want to think I'm not just trying to get something from you." Julian Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're the woman who's helping me protect my family's name. I'll never let anyone say otherwise." Sophia Rivers was a little surprised by how serious he sounded. Before she could think more about it, his phone rang. He picked it up and said, "Tomorrow we begin. Are you ready?" Sophia Rivers stood up and smoothed her dress. "I was born ready, Mr. Goldman. That's what assistants do. We're always ready." The next day, the big party began. It was exactly how Sophia Rivers had imagined. A big event with fancy decorations, expensive champagne, and all the rich and famous people in New York. Julian Hawthorne whispered to her, "Smile, darling. Half of Manhattan's photographers are here." Sophia Rivers had to force a smile as she walked into the ballroom with Julian Hawthorne. She wore a fancy dress picked out by Julian Hawthorne's mother, Isabella Carrington. As they walked through the crowd, Sophia Rivers felt like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. Isabella Carrington, Julian Hawthorne's mother, came over with a big smile. "Let's take some pictures with the family, dear," she said, pulling Julian Hawthorne away. Sophia Rivers was left standing alone when someone stepped up beside her. A man named Adam Wheeler, who was Julian Hawthorne's cousin, introduced himself. "So, you're the one who won Julian Hawthorne's heart," he said, looking at her like he was figuring her out. Sophia Rivers smiled politely. "It's nice to meet you." Adam Wheeler lowered his voice. "When Julian Hawthorne's father left his will, everyone thought he would marry someone from a rich family, maybe a socialite or the daughter of a CEO. But here you are." "I'm sorry to disappoint you," Sophia Rivers said, sipping her drink. Adam Wheeler laughed. "No, it's refreshing, but I wonder if you really know what you're getting into." Before Sophia Rivers could answer, Julian Hawthorne came back. He didn't like the way Adam Wheeler was talking to her. "Adam Wheeler," he said coldly, "I see you've met my fiancée." Adam Wheeler smiled, but then he left, and Julian Hawthorne turned to Sophia Rivers. "What did he say?" "Nothing we didn't already know," Sophia Rivers replied. "Your family has doubts about me." "Our family," Julian Hawthorne corrected. He said it loudly so other people could hear. "We need to convince them." Then, without waiting, Julian Hawthorne pulled her close and kissed her. It was just for the crowd, but something happened. When his lips touched hers, Sophia Rivers forgot that it was all fake. Her heart beat faster, and she felt something real. When they pulled apart, Julian Hawthorne looked at her like he was surprised. "I think they believe us now," he said, but there was something in his voice that made it sound different. The rest of the night passed with more talking and pretending. Sophia Rivers watched Julian Hawthorne charm the guests, making small talk and cutting deals while everyone else toasted and celebrated. At the end of the night, Isabella Carrington took Sophia Rivers aside. "You must understand," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes, "that the Goldman family has certain rules. It's not personal, but people like you don't always understand how important legacy is." Sophia Rivers kept her cool. "Maybe because of my background, I understand legacy better than most people. But my legacy isn't about money." Before Isabella could respond, Julian Hawthorne was there, stepping between them. "Is everything okay here?" he asked in a calm voice. "Perfectly fine," Isabella said, giving Sophia Rivers a tight smile, "just making sure the family feels welcome." Later, in the car, Sophia Rivers sat quietly while Julian Hawthorne drove them home. "You're very quiet," he noticed. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "Your mother made it clear I'm not what she wanted for you. The press is making us out to be a love story, and I'm just playing along. But that kiss—" She couldn't finish. Julian Hawthorne was quiet. "That was part of the plan, right? It was convincing?" "Yes," Sophia Rivers said, ignoring the way her chest tightened. "It was just part of the plan." When they got home, Julian Hawthorne told her she had done amazing that day. "Thank you," Sophia Rivers said, going to her room and closing the door. She sat on her bed, thinking about everything. The scary part wasn't the press or the family. It was that kiss. For a second, she forgot it was all just an act. That was the scariest part. The next morning, Sophia Rivers woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. She felt lonely in the big, quiet apartment. As she touched her lips, the memory of the kiss came back. It was just part of the plan. She told herself that. She had to remind herself again and again. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mom asking how the party was. There was a link to an article about the engagement. Sophia Rivers sighed, thinking about how she was now part of a big love story for everyone to talk about. Julian Hawthorne knocked on her door and came in. "We need to talk," he said. "There's a family lunch today. We need to be ready." Sophia Rivers raised an eyebrow. "More ready than yesterday?" "Yes," Julian Hawthorne said. "Things are getting complicated. That kiss," he paused, thinking. "It was convincing, but it's becoming harder to tell what's real and what's not." Sophia Rivers felt the weight of everything. People are starting to question, and I'm starting to question too. The kiss was real for a second, and that scares me. Julian Hawthorne looked at her for a moment. "I understand," he said softly, "but we'll keep playing the game." Sophia Rivers was sitting in a hospital, feeling her heart race as Julian Hawthorne walked closer to her. When their eyes met, it felt so powerful that her heart skipped a beat. "How did you know?" she asked, surprised. "I'm your fiancé, remember?" Julian Hawthorne said softly, but his words had a lot of meaning. "The hospital called me automatically because I'm your emergency contact," he explained. Clara Monroe, who was watching, listened carefully. Julian Hawthorne gently wiped away a tear from Sophia Rivers' cheek that she didn't even know had fallen. "You don't need to do that," Sophia Rivers whispered in English. "There's no one watching us." "Exactly," Julian Hawthorne said quietly. "That's why it's real." His words made Sophia Rivers feel confused and scared, but she didn't know why. She tried to change the subject. "The doctor said the treatment is okay," she said, trying to focus. "I already took care of that," Julian Hawthorne interrupted. "I transferred the full amount this morning." "But the agreement," Sophia Rivers began to say. "Forget the agreement," Julian Hawthorne said firmly. "Your father needs the treatment now, not later in pieces." Clara Monroe, even though she didn't fully understand English, seemed to know what was going on. "He's a good man," she said in Mandarin to Sophia Rivers. "Maybe better than you think." The next few hours were full of paperwork, doctors, and appointments. Julian Hawthorne stayed close to Sophia Rivers, quietly supporting her through the busy emotional day. Later, when they were alone in the hospital cafeteria, Sophia Rivers couldn't hold back anymore. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why do you care so much?" Julian Hawthorne thought for a long moment before answering. "Because somewhere between signing that contract and now, you became more than just part of a deal. You became important to me." Sophia Rivers stood up quickly, feeling unsure. "I can't tell what's real and what's just acting anymore," she said. "Then don't try to figure it out," Julian Hawthorne said gently, holding her hand. "Just feel it." His touch was warm and real, and it made Sophia Rivers feel like everything might be okay. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too," Julian Hawthorne said, surprising her. "But maybe that's what makes it real." In that moment, in the hospital cafeteria, Sophia Rivers realized something important. The business deal that had brought her and Julian Hawthorne together didn't matter anymore. They were now dealing with something much deeper and scarier, their real feelings for each other. After her father's surgery, Sophia Rivers felt things changing between her and Julian Hawthorne. They still acted professional at work, but there was a new, quiet understanding between them, something unspoken. One day, while they were working in a meeting room, Miles Donovan came back. He had a big envelope with him. "You'd be surprised what you can find out when you look in the right places," he said, sliding the envelope to Julian Hawthorne. "Like suspicious bank transfers and strange prenups." Sophia Rivers felt scared. Julian Hawthorne looked upset, but his voice was calm. "What do you want, Adam Wheeler?" "I want the truth," Adam Wheeler said, sitting down. "Why did you transfer such a big sum of money for her father's treatment before the wedding? And why is your contract so unusual?" Sophia Rivers felt her heart race. The whole plan they had made together was about to fall apart. "None of this is your business," Julian Hawthorne said firmly. "But it is," Adam Wheeler replied with a smile. "Especially if it looks like you're trying to cheat the will your uncle left behind." There was a long silence. Julian Hawthorne clenched his fists, looking angry. Sophia Rivers, trying to stay calm, spoke up. "You're not going to use this against him," she said to Adam Wheeler. "But there was an agreement," Julian Hawthorne began. "I know," Sophia Rivers interrupted him. "But things have changed." "Life doesn't always go according to plans or contracts," she said, standing up. "The money Julian Hawthorne sent for my father's treatment wasn't just about business. It was because he cares." Adam Wheeler stared at her like he didn't believe her. But she wasn't finished. "You're too busy looking for conspiracies, Adam Wheeler. You've forgotten what it means to care about someone." Adam Wheeler was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. Julian Hawthorne stood up too. "The documents might tell part of the story, but they don't show everything. They don't show how she changed me, how she made me see beyond numbers." Sophia Rivers watched as Julian Hawthorne stood next to her, his hand finding hers. "Yes, it started as a deal," Julian Hawthorne said, his voice stronger now. "But if you think you can use that against us, you're wrong." Adam Wheeler still seemed unsure. "Prove it," he said. "We don't need to prove anything to you," Sophia Rivers said. "But I'll tell you this, when my father was so sick, Julian Hawthorne stayed by my side all night at the hospital. He held my hand while I cried. No cameras, no audience, no reason except to help me." Julian Hawthorne's hand tightened around hers. "And that night I realized that I loved him," Sophia Rivers said, surprising herself with the truth. The room was silent. Adam Wheeler looked around at the others, his eyes narrowed. "If that's a lie, it's a really good one," Adam Wheeler said, half smiling. "But if it's true—" He paused. "Well, that would make Edward Carrington smarter than we thought." Adam Wheeler stood up, picking up his envelope. "You have 48 hours to decide. Tell the council the truth, or let them decide how they'll deal with this." When the room was empty, Sophia Rivers let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm sorry," she said, turning to Julian Hawthorne. "I shouldn't have said all that." Julian Hawthorne gently turned her to face him. "Was everything you said true?" Sophia Rivers looked into his eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "Even the part about falling in love." Julian Hawthorne smiled and touched her face. "So, Adam Wheeler was right. My father was smarter than we thought. What should we do now?" Sophia Rivers asked. Julian Hawthorne took her hand. "We'll rewrite our own contract," he said. "One based on the truth, not on appearances." As the night came, both of them knew they had reached a point where there was no going back. Their story was no longer just a business deal. It had turned into something real and deep. The next morning, after another long night at the hospital, Sophia Rivers's phone buzzed with a message from Isabella Carrington. "We need to talk," it said. Sophia Rivers knew that this meeting would be important, and her heart was heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Edward was really good at seeing things other people couldn't. "He saw something special in you, Sophia Rivers, long before any of us did," said Isabella. Sophia Rivers was confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Isabella explained, "Before Edward passed away, he mentioned you to me. He said there was a young woman in the office who could make Julian Hawthorne smile in a way we hadn't seen in years." The room became quiet, and everyone started to think about what Isabella had said. Adam Wheeler, who had been upset before, looked surprised. "So what do you suggest we do?" he asked. Julian Hawthorne answered, "The truth, a complete truth." "We agreed at first, but it turned into something real, something neither Sophia Rivers nor I expected," Julian Hawthorne continued. Adam Wheeler asked, "What about the money?" Sophia Rivers replied, "Every penny will be carefully explained and justified, not as part of a settlement, but as an investment in a family member's medical care. That's what families do for each other." The fog outside the window had cleared, and the sky over New York was bright and blue, almost like the city was telling them it was time for the truth to be shared. Isabella looked at Sophia Rivers closely, like someone who had seen many people pretend to be part of the Goldman family. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the best family traditions start when someone breaks the old rules." As the afternoon sunlight shone through the windows, Sophia Rivers realized that they weren't just starting a new chapter in their lives. They were also changing what it meant to be part of the Goldman family. A week later, on a clear morning, Sophia Rivers sat on the rooftop of her building in Manhattan. She watched the sunrise while sipping green tea. Her father was doing better, and there was real hope for his recovery. The mountain of medical bills that once seemed so scary were now just numbers on paper. Julian Hawthorne's voice came from the kitchen. "Can't sleep?" Sophia Rivers turned to face him. "I've been thinking about contracts, truths, and how life can change the story we think we're writing," she said. Julian Hawthorne walked over and poured himself some coffee. "The board meeting is today. Adam Wheeler has promised to show all his evidence. Are you worried?" "No," Sophia Rivers smiled. "I think my father would be proud, not of the first agreement, Seth, but of what it turned into." Sophia Rivers's phone buzzed with a message from Isabella. "Breakfast at Bergdorf's before the meeting, just the two of us," the message said. Sophia Rivers showed Julian Hawthorne. "My mom wants to see me," she said. Julian Hawthorne looked serious. "Isabella Carrington doesn't do anything without a reason. Are you ready for this?" The breakfast with Isabella was fancy, with mimosas and fresh croissants. Isabella, in her elegant clothes, greeted Sophia Rivers. "Thank you for coming," she said. After the waiter left, Isabella pulled out an envelope from her bag. "I found something interesting in Edward's files," she said. Isabella handed Sophia Rivers the letter, and Sophia Rivers's heart skipped a beat when she saw Edward's handwriting. She opened it carefully. It said, "Dear Miss Chen, if you are reading this letter, it means my son has finally found the courage to see what I've seen since the first day you joined Goldman Financial. a force that balances your smart thinking with real compassion. The CLA in the will was never about money or control. It was about change. Julian Hawthorne needed to learn that not all value can be measured in dollars. And you, my dear, have always shown him that there's more to life than numbers. Forgive this old man for his last attempt to help, but sometimes we need to set the stage for fate to work. With affection and hope, Edward Carrington. Sophia Rivers looked up from the letter. He planned everything, she whispered. Isabella smiled. Edward was always several steps ahead of everyone, but even he couldn't have predicted how much he'd change Julian Hawthorne. What do you mean? Asked Sophia Rivers. Isabella replied, Julian Hawthorne smiles now, not the fake corporate smile, but a real one. He spends time at hospitals helping others, and he actually cares about people. Tears filled Sophia Rivers' eyes. She couldn't believe what Isabella had said. The council will see today that sometimes traditions need to change, and sometimes the biggest legacy we can leave is the ability to change ourselves, Isabella said. Sophia Rivers arrived at Goldman Financial 2 hours later and found Julian Hawthorne waiting in the lobby. How did it go with my mom? He asked. Sophia Rivers handed him the letter. Julian Hawthorne read it, his face showing different emotions: surprise, understanding, and finally gratitude. My father, he said softly, was always a brilliant strategist, but I think this time even he would be amazed at the result. Why? Asked Sophia Rivers. Julian Hawthorne smiled, because he planned a business deal that turned into something no contract could control: real love. In the boardroom, everyone was already there when Sophia Rivers and Julian Hawthorne walked in. Adam Wheeler had his envelope full of evidence, but before he could speak, Isabella stood up. Gentlemen, she began, before we begin, I'd like to show you one last document, something that puts everything into perspective. She held up Edward's letter. After the meeting, the board agreed. Julian Hawthorne and Sophia Rivers' marriage was approved, and they all understood Edward Carrington's last lesson. Some things are more important than money, and some traditions need to change. That evening on the rooftop, Sophia Rivers joined Julian Hawthorne. When we first signed that contract, she said, I thought it was just a business deal, but now I see that some contracts are written in the heart, and those are the only ones that truly matter. The wind blew gently, carrying promises of change. Manhattan sparkled below, full of new possibilities, and under the stars, Julian Hawthorne and Sophia Rivers realized that Edward's greatest legacy wasn't his money or business empire. It was the lesson that the most valuable things in life can't be counted with money. They are written in the heart. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.